keeping North Dakota and Denver together. That's the natural pod. But if you use the Dartmouth Denver swap just to take away the ECAC first round matchup, you separate those two teams. Then you can put Denver where they belong in Loveland as the number 3 seed, and you can reward North Dakota as a number 1 seed in a region and number 3 overall seed. You can reward them playing closest to home.
Welcome to USCHO's Bracketology Extra for Thursday, February 5th, 2026. I'm Ed Trefsker alongside Jim Connolly. This podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Division I Men's Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Las Vegas. Visit ncaa.com/mfrozen4 for tickets. You can follow this podcast on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/USCHO to like and subscribe. Jim, you've had some complaints from people. Why are you moving teams around so much about attendance and so forth? Let's make bracket integrity the thing. And so you moved in that direction here, and that might satisfy some people, but maybe some of the same people will complain, well, nobody's going to show up. In any case, you followed a process that the committee could, which is to be as spare as possible in moving teams around and just make sure you don't have those first round matchups and just go with that.
Yeah, so this week I decided to take that direction, and there was one interconference matchup that we had to avoid in the first round, avoided that, and everything else kind of sat in a decent place the way I made that one switch. When I looked at it, attendance wouldn't be that bad in any of the 4 regions. Would it be maximized? No, and that's why I think the committee wouldn't follow this bracket. But I thought that this was a good example week to explain to some of the viewers and some of the listeners and readers what would happen if you really don't look at attendance as a major concern.
Well, let's look at the bracket, and if you're watching on video, it's up on your screen. The Albany region has the number 1 overall seed. That's Michigan. They would take on number 4 regional Bentley, Minnesota, Duluth, and Quinnipiac in the middle of the bracket. In Worcester, number 4 overall seed Western Michigan would have St. Thomas, and you'd have Penn State and Boston College in the other part of the bracket. In Sioux Falls, number 3 North Dakota takes on Wisconsin with Providence and Dartmouth, the other part of that bracket. And in the Loveland region, Michigan State, the number 2 overall seed, would have Augustana, and Cornell would take on Denver, and Denver is the host there. So they have to be in that bracket, and everything in Loveland has to be built around them. But in general, first thing you do is make the pods. You look at who's got to be together, and then you see where you put them. And North Dakota's pod gets Sioux Falls. And I guess if we start out right there, attending a problem there at all.
No, see, and that's one of the reasons that you can make that placement really early. And the way I was looking at it early was maybe keeping North Dakota and Denver together. That's the natural pod. But if you use the Dartmouth Denver swap just to take away the ECAC first round matchup, you separate those two teams. Then you can put Denver where they belong in Loveland as the number 3 seed, and you can reward North Dakota as a number 1 seed in a region and number 3 overall seed. You can reward them playing closest to home as possible. So that's really why I went with that style of a bracket this week. If I had left them together in Loveland, that takes North Dakota really far away. I didn't think that was fair. At that point, maybe I could have swapped North Dakota and another number 1 seed to get them back, and maybe that would have forced both North Dakota and Augustana into the same pod together in Loveland. In Sioux Falls, but I really didn't. I wanted to try to really maintain bracket integrity 100% as much as I could this week. So that was why I went with the simple switch.
Well, and you had to do a swap, and that was Dartmouth and Denver because otherwise you would have had Dartmouth and Cornell matched up against each other. And that's one of the things the committee really tries not to do is to have those first round matchups for a couple of reasons. One, because those are teams that are very familiar with each other, and this is supposed to be a national tournament. But I think also you can make the case, if you have Cornell and Dartmouth in the first round, immediately you're eliminating one team from that league before you even get started. And this way it keeps everybody, gives everybody a chance to keep going. So that made it possible. And that ended up moving Denver into the Michigan State pod. And so you got Michigan State in Loveland and you've got North Dakota in Sioux Falls. That ends up working out okay. Do you get a little concerned about moving the number 2 overall seed so far from home, or is there just no real option?
There's no real option. It's a plane ride no matter where Michigan State is heading. So, to send them to Loveland, it's part of life. I mean, Michigan is going to likely go east because, that's where they generally have slotted this week. They ended up in the Albany region. Could they end up in Worcester? Either of those are two possible. But once you're hopping on a plane, it doesn't matter if that plane is going, 800 miles or if it's going 2,000 miles. The NCAA really doesn't make a determination between the two. I think they wouldn't mind putting Michigan State in Loveland.
Well, one team that hops on a plane instead of a bus in this scenario is Augustana. They are right there in Sioux Falls, but the way the bracket worked out, you would have them having to go to Loveland, Colorado. You probably don't have to worry about attendance in Sioux Falls with North Dakota there, but is this really about keeping the bracket integrity, and is this something the committee would do?
I'm not sure this is something the committee would do, because there are ways that if you made additional swaps, you would get Augustana to Sioux Falls and you would get a couple of Eastern teams back east. And that would really help attendance maybe in either Worcester or Albany. But I don't think you're boosting attendance by enough to really do anything to really destroy the integrity of the bracket. So I'm focusing really on the bracket integrity this week, not on attendance. So, in this one, I know it seems weird that a team literally could have a building that they've played in during the regular season. They played games in this building. They won't be able to play there and they'll have to hop onto a plane. I know it might not make sense, but I think in terms of taking some fairness, I don't mind doing this.
You mentioned attendance, and while you're not putting brackets together for attendance this week, you still have to have some concerns, and that would be the eastern ones, Albany and Worcester. Now, Albany, Quinnipiac, they should be able to travel, right? It's about 2.5 hour drive or so, especially if you make one pit stop. Bentley has built a fan base. It's not that hard to take the Mass Pike and through into New York. And on the other hand, Minnesota, Duluth, and Michigan are major brands, especially Michigan, which has a huge alumni base, but neither one is local either. So what do you do with that? Is that viable? Is that going to work?
Yeah, it's not going to be a natural sellout. And it's a big building. So that's what you have to kind of keep in mind. You're trying to fill a larger building. It's what you're going to be able to do. I do think that, you could potentially have put in, and I've had somebody suggest this, almost just swap what I have with Worcester and Albany. Maybe get Penn State into Albany because their fan base is a little bit closer there and might travel there better than they would to Worcester. But these two sites are only separated by about less than 2 hours, Worcester and Albany. So I just don't know that there's a big determining factor between one and the other. In terms of size of building, maybe you want to try to put the biggest crowd in the bigger building. But I was okay going with this. I don't think that it's going to be a packed building. And listen, if you end up with Minnesota Duluth and Michigan in the final, it could be really empty. But yeah, I think it's what you have to do.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's any answer to that. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, when North Dakota was last in Albany, the group that calls itself the best traveling fan base didn't bother to show up. So, what are you going to do about that? It's kind of the thing with the regionals anyway. You don't have much time to plan your travel if you want to go to those and maybe go to the Frozen Four. But the other one you mentioned, Worcester only being a couple hours away, that's got Boston College in there. So that really should draw a fan base, at least for Boston College games. But Western Michigan, Penn State, and St. Thomas, those are some variables for that. The Penn State maybe can travel well. Penn State's got a big alumni base, but Western Michigan, kind of a smaller alumni base and quite a ways from Kalamazoo, and St. Thomas really just starting to build a D1 base.
Yeah, I know I saw the Western crowd a couple of years ago in Manchester was, it's what you expect from a Midwest school, probably about 700 fans show up. I think Boston College can drive attendance, but I don't expect them to drive much more than 3,000 people into that building. That's what an okay size fan base. Boston College is not a rampant hockey fan base until you see them maybe in a national title game or a Frozen Four. Get them to Vegas and you'll see a lot of BC faithful. I there's just not a lot I felt like I could do to help either of these two regions. If Hockey East can get one more team in, and that bubble team Connecticut is the one that sits on the wrong side right now. If they were to get in, that changes everything. We go back to the brackets looking a little bit more like they did last week, where I thought the attendance was really well balanced. This week with the teams that are in the field, I just don't think we have that same balance.
Yeah, if you could get Yukon to Albany and Providence and BC into Worcester, no problem at all. Let's take a quick look around the regions. We talked about Albany a little bit. Let's stay there. Michigan, Minnesota, Duluth, Quinnipiac, and Bentley. It's been a few years, but the 16-1 matchup is always one that is dangerous for an upset. But I really think the other part of that bracket, Minnesota, Duluth, and Quinnipiac, is kind of a highlight matchup for that.
And two of your more recent national champions, including the first-time national champion Quinnipiac, Minnesota Duluth back in the tournament after a couple of years absence. That's a heavyweight matchup in the first round. And then if Michigan gets past Bentley, Michigan, Minnesota Duluth, Michigan, Quinnipiac, I love either of those two in a regional championship.
In Worcester, you've got Western Michigan, Penn State, BC, and St. Thomas. And again, Penn State and BC, that middle part of the bracket seems to be a real matchup. But you know what? St. Thomas is no freebie for Western Michigan either. This would be a fun bracket.
No, this one goes back to experience too. Not that Pat Ferschweiler is lacking experience, but you're talking a St. Thomas team coached by Rico Blasi, a lot of NCAA tournament experience at Miami. I love that as a potential first round, and there's a potential first round upset. And you think of Western, they've played some very close early round games, and they did really well, I thought, in close games last year. But it's still a good test. In terms of the other part of the bracket, Penn State, Boston College. Tell me something you wouldn't love about that matchup. That would be some of the highest end NHL draft picks. Plus Gavin McKenna, who hasn't even been drafted yet. Being involved in a great national tournament game. And then again, what you get for that regional final, again, you don't want to lose Boston College in the first round because that could really, make for an empty building the next day. Although Penn State there's a chance that Penn State could bring as many fans as Boston College. So we'll see there. But I look forward to a region like that. And again, both of those matchups, Western St. Thomas especially, love that one.
Well, how about out in Sioux Falls? You got North Dakota out there, and Wisconsin in the other part, Providence and Dartmouth. That seems like two very different types of games that would happen in that first round. A little more grinding, a little more tight between the Eastern teams, and maybe some freewheeling between two teams that like to put up a lot of shots. But Dartmouth, it's been a long time since they've been in the tournament, and this would be a new experience for the team and for the staff in many ways. How much does that play in, and how much is it part of this whole thing, the situation with an ECAC team going out west?
I'm interested by that. I always think first time experiences are huge in this tournament. So, Reed Cashman, he's been there with Quinnipiac, but to be there as a head coach now, I think that would be really great. And to see them in terms of what type of performance they could put forth, would they give Providence some headaches? I bet they would. And then North Dakota, Wisconsin, you want to talk about two heavyweights going at it. And that building will be as packed can be when those two teams play. I do worry that the Providence Dartmouth game might be played in front of a really small crowd. But as we've seen, if you put them in the first game, by the time you get to the third period, that game's probably going to be pretty packed with North Dakota fans.
Yeah, and if I remember right from a couple of years ago, the game with BU and RIT maybe had about 3,000 people in the building the first game, which in a nearly 11,000 seat building may seem a little empty, but that's not too bad for two teams way on the other side of the country. Well, let's look at Loveland. You've got Michigan State and Augustana and Cornell and Denver. Some neat matchups there. I can imagine a great Cornell-Denver game, but how about Augustana? They are kind of a wild card, and they have shown themselves to be a dangerous team this year.
They're right on the bubble right now, and if they get in, that's a real big question mark. What do we know about them, except that they've been a headache for a lot of teams this year? And then, to take on a Michigan State team, led by Trey Augustine, that's been red hot and has extremely high expectations, looking to get back to a Frozen Four. They want to get, they want to shake off a lot of that national championship rust. And I thought they've done that in past tournaments, but they need to get back to the mountaintop. And that's what they really have as a goal. And, on the other side of that, Cornell and Denver, it's a tough ask for Cornell to go into Loveland and basically play a road game. But I'm going to tell you, this is Casey Jones's first year. When Mike Shaper was behind the bench at Cornell, that team didn't back down from any challenge. And if you remember the last few years, they have done really well in first round games. Can Casey Jones get them back to a regional final and maybe even get them back over that hump into a Frozen Four? That's a question that a lot of Cornell fans are asking right now. And I know that we'd love to see the Big Red take that big step forward.
And what a rematch it would be between the Spartans and the Big Red after the upset last season.
That's a good point too. You go back to that game last year where Cornell did pull the big upset. That was when Mike Shaper's season was staying alive. His career was staying alive. That would be one that would be circled, I'm sure, if that matchup was a potential in the second round.
Well, let's do some quick hits on games this week to watch that are going to make an impact on the NPI and shift things around. I think just about every college hockey fan has this one circled: Michigan versus Michigan State. It's two games, the second one in Detroit at Little Caesars Arena. So it's 1 versus 2, maybe the overall 1 seed in the margin, a big stage. How important is this one overall to the big picture?
And this is really all about the thought of who will be the number 1 overall seed. If Michigan sweeps this series, they might get locked into, they'll probably be locked into the tournament. They will probably be locked into, or very close to locked into, a 1 seed. And they're going to be really close to locking themselves into a number 1 overall seed. Their margin right now over Michigan State is still pretty large in the NPI. This could be an opportunity for the Spartans to close the gap if they were to take a lot of points out of this series as well. So I think that this is a 1 versus 2. We've had it a couple of times in recent years with Boston College and Boston University. It's nice to see that rivalry out in the Midwest get to pick this one up.
Dartmouth versus Harvard, a single game in the travel partner scheduling that they use in the ECAC. Dartmouth is kind of right in the middle of the field. Harvard on the outside looking in, but close. One of the things that we've talked about is how much a game can swing things in the ECAC. This is probably a critical one for Dartmouth.
It feels it. And Harvard, they're pretty far below the bubble right now, and it would take a lot for them to get up. But if they want to make some sort of a run here in the last few weeks, this is a game that they need to win. Dartmouth probably is saying the same thing because they have slipped. They're no longer that number 1 NPI team that we had heading, in toward Christmas. They've dropped enough games that they've fallen in another loss or more losses in the ECAC. Every loss is kind of critical right now and will take them down in the NPI. So they can't afford to lose too many games.
In Hockey East, you've got UConn and Northeastern on Friday. UConn right on the edge, and they've been in and out week after week. Northeastern has been closing in, but, a few losses as of late have kind of leveled that out. For UConn, it's a must-win to stay in the hunt.
It feels it. They're right below the bubble right now. They're trying to climb in. This is another Hockey East game that can give them a little bit of a bump in the NPI because it is Northeastern. It's a team that's been playing pretty well. They did not, advance out of the bean pot the other night. They still got a neutral ice tie against Boston University. So it was not something that destroys their NCAA resume. But the Huskies are really in a position right now where they have no room for error. I would see them needing to go near perfect down the stretch in the regular season to get themselves back into the bubble by playoff time.
And North Dakota travels to the surprise of the season, or one of them anyway, Minnesota Duluth. This is going to impact the top 4 and where Duluth is. And we've seen over the past few weeks, a single weekend series makes the difference from a first seed to a second seed for teams in the NCHC.
That's what I think is really on the line here. Is this the chance for Minnesota Duluth to get back into that number 1 seed? North Dakota, can they lock in and hold on to that number 1 seed? Those are the questions you have to kind of ask yourselves right now. I think that this is one that is always a heavyweight matchup in the NCHC. Now that you've put both of these teams back into the national picture, it regains the national prominence that it always had. This is the series to circle, I think, this week in the NCHC.
Well, that's going to do it for USCHO Bracketology Extra for this week. We've been sponsored by the NCAA Division I Men's Frozen 4, April 9th and 11th in Las Vegas. Visit ncaa.com/mfrozen4 for tickets. And be sure to follow us on YouTube if you like video podcasts. youtube.com/USCHO. Like and subscribe. For Jim Connolly, I'm Ed Tretzker, and this has been USCHO's Bracketology Extra.